Hey everybody, today's video is called The Promise to Baruch. And today we continue our pass-through study here in the book of Jeremiah, where we're looking at the promise to Baruch to have his life spared. In today's chapter, I believe it is the shortest chapter in the book of Jeremiah. So today's video is going to be very quick, less than 10 minutes, I'm going to predict. And so we are in chapter 45 as we are narrowing the end of our study through Jeremiah here in the next couple weeks. And in Jeremiah chapter 45 verse 1, it opens up with the word that Jeremiah the prophet spoke to Baruch the son of Neriah when he had written these words in the book at the instruction of Jeremiah in the 4th year of Jehoiakim the son of Josiah king of Judah. So the year spoken about here in verse 1 is 605 BC, when the recording of God's message to Jeremiah was in view. And the first scroll prepared for public reading, as we looked at back in Jeremiah chapter 36 verse 1 through 3. And then in verse 2 and 3 is saying, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, to you, O Baruch, you said, woe is me now, for the Lord has added grief to my sorrow. I fainted in my sight, and I find no rest." So we see Baruch felt anxiety as his own cherished plans of a bright future were apparently dashed. And many of us can feel that as well when we have plans on what we want to do with our lives, and they don't fall in the way the dice doesn't fall the way we want them to roll. So we can fail when a bright future is dashed. Even death because a darkening peril. And also we see Baruch was possibly pressed by human questionings about God carrying through with such calamity. And Jeremiah, we see, spoke to encourage Baruch as Baruch suffered along with Jeremiah opposition and abuse for his faithfulness to God, because Baruch is a scribe, so all the words that the prophet speaks, Baruch is writing them down. And so Baruch, he's exhausted physically and spiritually at this point. And to Baruch, sometimes it feels the same way to us, that the world is falling apart around us. And in verse 4 it says, "Thus you shall say to him, thus says the Lord, behold, what I have built I will break down, and what I have planted I will pluck up. That is this whole land." So God will judge this whole nation, the Jews. And God had a word for his discouraged and exhausted servant. And God spoke to Baruch about his great power, and his great power expressed in judgment. And God here reminds Baruch that he wasn't done with his judgment on Jerusalem and Judah. And there's still more to come until the wrath of God is complete. And in verse 5, to finish the chapter, as I mentioned, very short, "And do you seek great things for yourself? Do you seek them? For behold, I will bring adversity on all flesh, says the Lord, but I will give your life to you as a prize in all places wherever you go." So Baruch, we see that he had his expectations too high, and that made the disaster hard to bear. And it's enough that he had to be content just to live. Jeremiah, who once also complained, learned by his own suffering to encourage complainers. And like Abed-Melech, his faithfulness would not go unrewarded by the Lord. And so to wrap up this very short chapter today, we look at what Baruch said with the setting of the word. And in verse 2 and 3, we see Baruch's grief and sorrow being poured out to us. And in verse 4, we see the Lord speaks of his power to encourage Baruch. In the chapter, it ends with the promise of God's care. So in a nutshell, this should encourage us, because we are living in a time where it's easy to feel like the world's falling apart all around us. It's easy to have grief and sorrow in this world, but we need to reflect on the power of God, that God is more powerful than anything. And we need to take in the promise of God's care. You see in, I'm going to flip over here. It's in 1 Peter, I think, chapter 5, I want to say. In verse 7, we need to cast all our care upon him, for the Lord cares for us. 1 Peter 5:7. So, just want to encourage you with this short little chapter on those topics today. And I hope that you have a great rest of your weekend. We'll see you again this upcoming week, as we'll be looking at moving into the section of Jeremiah where we're going to see the judgment against nations. And we're coming close to an end here. We're only a couple weeks away. Well, the plan is Lord willing, we will finish up Jeremiah on New Year's Eve. So I hope you have a great rest of your weekend. God bless, and we'll see you next week.